then the next thing is depth of field. So that is relatively easy because it's a camera effect. I'll go and zoom into Jill down here, and I think we don't need the other viewport for that. And we'll go and, having said that, we're going to go and select my main camera here. And on the camera, I have an option that says depth of field. And this is something we need to enable. My face can come back now, good stuff. And we can pick an object that we want to focus on. So right now, the moment I've enabled it, you can see she's out of focus and the building in the background is in focus. So now everything's in deep focus. And if I go and enable that, it'll render something, but it'll be the distance here. So let's use the object of our desire, which is going to be the focus helper. And if I focus on that, she, or wherever the focus helper is going to be in focus. And you can see that this is now starting to blur out, but she's in a pretty rock solid focus there. You can always go and adjust the focus helper by moving it exactly where it needs to be. So if you wanted to adjust fine focus now, you can totally do that. You can move it left, right, center, up or down, and it'll go and focus on that. Usually you want to focus on the eyes, and you can have a separate focus helper and a separate light helper. You can split those out. That's not a problem. But I think we're probably going to be in good shape. That's something else that you could play around with. Move that up and down and see what that does to the light. If you feel like you've illuminated too much of the upper body and not enough of the lower body, just go and move the light helper down, and then you'll see what happens to the light. So this is only going to illuminate the top of her body, whereas this is now going to illuminate the rest of her body. But all the light sources, since they're all pointing at that, they're going to follow. So that's kind of cool. Probably chest is probably going to be enough here. If you had a split out object, you can go and move it directly on her eyes, and that's going to be fine. As I select my camera and change the f-stop of that camera here. If you put it to 0, then everything's going to be out of focus. That's basically the most blurred effect that you can have. Real life cameras rarely go beyond 1. So 1 means whatever comes into the lens also leaves the lens on the outside. And it's rare that that happens. Even though Stanley Kubrick had lenses that are 0.7, which technically that means more light comes out at the other end than comes in. I don't know how that works, but hey, it's one of those things. But you should never really go, you should never have to go below 1 is what I'm trying to say. So 1 yields this result, which is pretty cool. But if that's too blurred out in the background, you can increase that 1.2, 1.4, 1.8, something like that. I think maybe let me try 1.4 so that we get a little bit more depth of field in here. F12 to render that again and just see what the change is, and then I'll show you how to increase your render resolution and how to get a little bit of a punchy color correction in there. Not bad at all, if I may say so myself. The tree looks perfectly fine now. I don't see any of these sharp, cheap edges. Depth of field looks pretty good to me. I mean, I'm inclined to render another one with more depth of field, just because I'm curious of what that would look like. We fixed the eye issue, and I think everything else is probably a good job for Photoshop. I think I'm going to try to turn this down, and let's see if we can make that happen here. I'll switch to slot 3. Just because I might be interested in what that would look like. Let's go and see if we can find that overblown emission on the clock tower here. So that'll be on the building. Oh, is it a separate object? It might be, it might be. This is good. Police clock. That's fantastic. We can get it from here, I think. Strength, that's fantastic. We didn't have to go into the shading tab and adjust the node. We can probably do it from here. So strength, let's turn that down to 0 to see if it actually does what we thought it's going to do. It doesn't. That's interesting. So let's go and examine the shading node for that. Okay, so it looks like the culprit with the overlay switched on was in fact that there's a light in front of it. So if I go and if I don't know where that is, if I wanted to see where that light is, I can just hover over the outliner here and press the full stop on the numpad. If you're scrolled off it and you're thinking, where is this thing I've just selected, full stop on the numpad will get you straight there. And if we go and switch that off, we can see it looks actually much more impressive if we just blend that in a little bit. So perfect. On the lights tab here, 300 watt is way too much. 50 is probably going to be just enough. And then the clock face itself can then do the rest. I'm thinking that's probably going to look better, don't we think? I think so. So let's switch to more depth of field on our camera while we're at it. Do that over here. So instead of 1.4, I'm going to try 1.2 or even 1. Let's do 1 here. And then we'll go and render that again. Also with the color correction, that is something you can do on the render settings tab here. If you go and close some of these things down here, the ones that want you to update under color management, there is something where you have the look and feel. This is the high contrast that's already enabled. So none would yield something like this. And then you can also have something like medium contrast, and you can see what that does. I didn't know that was enabled already, but that is something that you can play with, and it gives you basic color correction. So I prefer probably to leave this either on medium or on none and do the rest in Photoshop. High contrast was already a pretty good selection. So let's go and let this render and see what else we can do to this once we get it into Photoshop.